A new report by Reuters finds a group of American hackers who once worked for U.S. intelligence agencies helped the United Arab Emirates spy on journalists. Back in 2009, the UAE created Project Raven with the help of American intelligence contractors and former senior White House officials from George W. Bush's administration. The project was initially designed to crack down on terrorism and monitor militants around the Middle East. However, the project quickly expanded to spying on several prominent figures that are critical of the UAE. Joining me now to break it all down is investigative journalist Ben Swann. Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. Now, who were the targets of this operation? Yeah,
so apparently kind of a wide swath of people, but most specifically, maybe most interestingly, there was a group of journalists, including a reporter from the BBC, as well as at least 3 U.S. journalists who, interestingly, have not been named so far. So these ex-NSA workers who have revealed a lot of this information about Project Raven have also chosen not to disclose which journalists in the U.S. they were spying on.
Now, why would U.S. hackers get involved in an operation like this? I mean, what did they have to gain by helping the UAE spy on these journalists and activists?
Well, the UAE pays very well, I'm sure, as does the Saudis, as do the government of Qatar. The problem is that obviously when you have people who have been given essentially the training and the understanding and the insight onto how to utilize NSA technology, how to utilize the technology to hack emails, cell phones, whatever it might be, they are now, when they're no longer working for the NSA, available to the highest bidder to essentially go and do this work elsewhere. So why wouldn't they? I guess that becomes the question. Why wouldn't they take that understanding and that expertise that they have and essentially sell it out and say, who wants to hire me to, hack into political enemies and to monitor phone messages and to get whatever information you might need?
Now, a former Ravens operative said one of the goals of this operation was to find material showing Qatar's royal family had influenced the coverage of Al Jazeera and other media outlets, and to uncover any ties between Al Jazeera and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Correct.
Were there any connections?
Apparently, none that have been made public so far. So there's reportedly no connection that was made between the Muslim Brotherhood and the royal family or Al Jazeera. But what's interesting here is that the government of Qatar obviously pays for Al Jazeera. And so they're looking for some kind of connection. I don't think you need to necessarily look for a deeper connection. So I don't fully believe that was really what they were doing. Were they really trying to establish a connection there, or were they trying to connect it to the Muslim Brotherhood, which, again, this is 2009, is at the time considered essentially the next Al-Qaeda, right? This was the group that was going to take over Egypt. This was the group that was going to have significant terror ties, which was thought at the time. It's now 2018. When do we ever talk about the Muslim Brotherhood anymore, unless it's in the past tense? It doesn't even really exist as this great threat that was promised that it would become.
I want to read you a quote from a director of the Al Arabi television. He was one of UAE's targets.
Sure.
He said in an interview, quote, "It's a very worrying trend that a state is using all these things to spy on people critical of them. I'm not a terrorist or a money launderer." So was the UAE simply doing this to shut down a group of people that were critical of the Middle Eastern country, or was this a tactic to instill fear?
I think it's a tactic to instill fear, but I also think it's an attempt to shut down. But again, let's take a step back and remember that this is not simply something that came from the UAE. All right, this is something, behavior that we have seen come from the NSA and from our own government at times as well. I mean, go back to 2013. We know that the Obama administration was using the Justice Department to spy on a Fox News reporter, James Rosen. They had hacked his emails. They were monitoring his phone calls. They were monitoring his parents' phone calls. So if our government does it to journalists here in the United States, if our government is doing it to the average citizen here in the U.S.,
an activist,
why would other countries not do this to journalists or to so-called political enemies? I think the idea that this is the shocking idea, it isn't so much shocking as it is disappointing to know that it's continued to happen. So the question becomes, moving forward, how do you pull this thing back? How do you put the genie back in that bottle? I think it's almost impossible to do so.
And would you agree, after saying that our government here in the U.S., governments around the world have done the same thing, would you agree that this is an abuse of power?
Oh, absolutely, it's an abuse of power. It's an abuse of power to the citizenry. It's certainly an abuse of power to journalists, but journalists are not not and should not be a protected class. They should be treated as any citizen would be treated. So there is at time, I think, outrage. And as a journalist, right, I can understand that. Outrage that says, well, you're spying on journalists because you're trying to squash dissension and that voice of dissension. And that's true. But journalists are not a protected class. And so we as journalists should be fighting equally for the rights of the average citizen who's also being spied upon in this country and internationally. To recognize that they too are being affected by this, and just because they don't have a professional capacity that's being squashed, they have a right to their voice as well.
Interesting point there. Thank you so much for your insight, Ben
Ashlee,
Swann.
Thank you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.